I never joined the university team to fall in love. I joined because the court was the only place where the noise in my head went quiet. The rhythmic thump of the ball against the polished wood, the squeak of sneakers in a fast pivot, the singular focus of the shot, it was a language I understood better than words. It was a solitude I could control. And for 2 years, that was enough. Then came Coach Marcus Thorne. He arrived like a storm front, all dark clouds and low, rumbling thunder. He was younger than the last coach, but he carried an authority that felt ancient. He didn't walk, he stalked the sidelines, his 6'4" frame coiled with a relentless energy that made the air around him feel thin. His presence was a physical weight in the gym, a pressure against the skin. From the first day of training camp, he was a puzzle I couldn't stop trying to solve from a distance. He rarely smiled. His praise was surgically precise and just as rare. His criticism, however, was a flood. He would stop a full-court drill with a single sharp blast of his whistle, the sound echoing off the rafters like a gunshot, and his voice would cut through the ensuing silence. He saw everything. A lazy pass, a slow defensive slide, a moment of hesitation before a shot. Nothing escaped him. The other guys on the team feared him, respected him, and mostly kept their distance. They saw the clipboard, the stopwatch, the permanent scowl etched between his brows. I saw those things too, but I saw more. I saw the way his jaw would clench when we lost a close game, a muscle twitching in a silent, furious rhythm. I saw the way he'd rub the back of his neck when he thought no one was looking, a gesture of profound weariness that seemed to betray the ironclad exterior. I saw the loneliness in him, because I recognized it. It was a mirror to my own. My life was a fortress of routine. Class, gym, library, my small single dorm room. I had teammates, not friends. I ate most meals alone, a book propped up in front of me as a shield against conversation. I wasn't unfriendly, I was just quiet. A ghost in the machine of campus life. This quiet was my safety. My solitude was my armor. Coach Thorne was the first crack in that armor. My observation of him started as a player studying a coach, trying to understand his strategy. But it morphed into something else, something deeper and more dangerous. It became an obsession with details. The faint silver scar that cut through his left eyebrow. The way his dark hair curled at the nape of his neck when it got damp with sweat. The sheer size of his hands, calloused and capable, as they demonstrated a defensive stance or gripped a basketball. He was a walking contradiction. A force of nature who seemed, in stolen moments, to be deeply tired. A man who commanded a room of 20 athletes with a single look, but who always ate his post-practice meal alone in his office, the door shut tight. I wanted to know the men behind the whistle. The wanting was an ache, a low hum beneath the surface of my carefully constructed life. It was a stupid, impossible thing to want. He was my coach. I was just a player. A number on a roster. The distance between us was a canyon, wide and uncrossable. And I was terrified of heights. The inciting incident, the disruption, wasn't some grand dramatic event. It was mundane. It was stupid. It was a Tuesday practice, a simple layup drill I'd done 1,000 times. I went up, and another player undercut me by accident. My landing was all wrong. My ankle folded, a sickening, fiery pop that echoed inside my own skull. Pain, white and blinding, shot up my leg. I was on the floor, the polished wood suddenly cold against my cheek. The world narrowed to the throbbing agony in my ankle. The noise of practice faded, replaced by a high-pitched ringing in my ears. And then, his voice. Low and urgent, cutting through the haze. Don't move him. Someone get the kit. Now. I felt a presence beside me, a large shadow blocking out the harsh gymnasium lights. I smelled the faint, clean scent of his soap and the sharper scent of his exertion. A hand, large and warm, settled on my shoulder. It wasn't a clinical touch, it was steadying. Grounding. Breathe, Miller. Just breathe. He called me Miller. He always called us by our last names. But hearing it then, in that quiet, controlled voice, felt different. It felt personal. The team trainer took over, but Coach Thorne stayed there, kneeling on the court beside me. I could feel the heat radiating from his body. His proximity was overwhelming, a sensory overload on top of the pain. He watched the trainer's every move, his expression unreadable but intense. His focus was entirely on me, on my injury, and that intense focus felt like a physical touch all its own. The diagnosis was a severe sprain. No broken bones, thank God, but I was benched for at least 4 weeks. 4 weeks of rehab. 4 weeks of watching from the sidelines. And, as per team policy for injuries requiring specific recovery protocols, 4 weeks of one-on-one rehab supervision. With the head coach. My world tilted on its axis. The carefully maintained distance between us was about to evaporate. I would be forced into his orbit, into a small, quiet training room, just the two of us. The thought sent a tremor through me that was equal parts terror and a dark, thrilling hope. The fortress was about to be breached. The first session was agony, and not just because of my ankle. The training room was sterile and silent, a stark white box tucked away behind the locker rooms. It smelled of antiseptic and athletic tape. The silence in there was different from the silence of the library or my dorm. It was a living thing, a heavy blanket that amplified every small sound, the hum of the fluorescent lights, the soft whir of the ice machine, the sound of my own ragged breathing. Coach Thorne was already there, leaning against a treatment table, arms crossed over his broad chest. He wore a simple gray t-shirt that stretched across his shoulders, and the muscles in his arms were sharply defined. He didn't say hello. He just nodded toward the table. Up. Let's see the damage. His voice was clipped, all business. The coach, not the men. I hobbled over, my heart a frantic trapped bird against my ribs. I sat on the edge of the table, my injured leg propped up. He moved with a surprising grace for such a large man, grabbing a roll of tape and a pair of scissors. He knelt in front of me. He was so close. I could see the individual specks of gray in his 5 o'clock shadow, the fine lines that fanned out from the corners of his eyes. I held my breath, watching as he gently, expertly, began to unwrap the bandage from my ankle. His fingers were methodical, careful. They brushed against my skin, and each point of contact was a small electric shock. This was my new reality. Close observation, no longer from the safety of the bleachers, but from inches away. I noticed the way he focused, his brow furrowed in concentration, his lower lip caught between his teeth. I saw that the faint scar above his eye was older than I thought, a pale, thin line against his tanned skin. His hands, which I'd only ever seen gripping a ball or a clipboard, were impossibly gentle. They were hands that knew how to fix things. He worked in silence for a few minutes, his focus absolute. I felt like a specimen under a microscope. My own silence, usually a comfort, felt clumsy and loud. I should say something. Anything. Does it look bad? The words came out as a croak. He didn't look up. It's swollen. But you were lucky. Could have been a fracture. He pressed his thumb gently into the flesh just below the bone, and I winced, sucking in a sharp breath. His eyes flicked up to meet mine for a fraction of a second. They were a deep, complicated shade of brown, almost black in the harsh light. Sore there? I just nodded, unable to speak. His gaze dropped back to my ankle. He began the exercises. Slow, painful movements. Flexing, pointing, rotating. He guided my foot with his hand, his touch firm and impersonal. But it didn't feel impersonal to me. Every time his skin met mine, my stomach filled with a swarm of bees. I focused on a crack in the ceiling tile, on the rhythmic drip of a leaky faucet somewhere down the hall, on anything other than the man kneeling in front of me. This became our routine. Every day after practice, I would limp to the training room, and he would be there, waiting. We rarely spoke. He would issue quiet commands. Flex. Hold it. 10 seconds. Good. Again, I would follow them, my body aching, my mind screaming. One afternoon, about a week into the rehab, he was demonstrating a new stretch. It required me to lie on my back and pull my knee towards my chest. You're not getting the full extension, he said, his voice laced with a familiar impatience. You're protecting it too much. You have to push through the discomfort. He moved closer. Like this. He placed one hand on my shin to stabilize my leg. With his other hand, he pressed gently on my knee, guiding it further towards my shoulder. His palm was warm and heavy. His fingers wrapped around the back of my knee, and the casual, unintentional intimacy of the touch stole the air from my lungs. His knuckles brushed against the sensitive skin of my inner thigh. It was an explosion of pure sensation. Heat bloomed in my chest and spread through my limbs, a dizzying, terrifying warmth. My heart hammered against my ribs so hard I was sure he could feel the vibration through my leg. It was nothing. It was a clinical adjustment. A coach helping a player. But to me, it was everything. It was the first touch that felt less like a procedure and more like a connection. I must have flinched, or maybe my breathing hitched, because he stopped. He pulled his hand back as if he'd been burned. His eyes met mine, and for the first time, I saw something other than professional detachment. I saw confusion. A flicker of surprise. "Sorry," he muttered, standing up abruptly. "Just try to hold it there." He turned away, busying himself with rearranging a stack of clean towels that were already perfectly arranged. The air in the room crackled with a new kind of tension. The professional boundary had been blurred, if only for a second. The silence that fell between us was no longer empty. It was charged, filled with the unspoken thing that had just happened. My panic was a cold wave, followed by a hot flush of shame. He knows. He felt it. He thinks I'm a freak. But he didn't say anything. He just finished the session with a clipped, "Ice it for 20, and left the room without a backward glance. I was left alone on the table, my body trembling, the ghost of his touch still burning on my skin. The dynamic between us shifted after that day. The silence was still there, but it was heavier. More awkward. He was careful not to touch me more than absolutely necessary. He would use a towel to guide my leg, or point to a spot instead of touching it. The distance he created was a clear message. A wall going back up. And it hurt more than I could have imagined. I thought that was it. I thought I had ruined the fragile neutrality we had. I retreated further into myself, my shame a constant companion. Then came the night of the away game against our biggest rivals. I was on the bench, of course, charting plays on a clipboard, feeling useless. We were down by 2 points with 10 seconds on the clock. The entire season felt like it was riding on this one game. The tension in the arena was a physical thing, a crushing weight. Coach Thorne was a caged lion on the sideline, pacing, yelling, his face a mask of furious concentration. He called a timeout. The team huddled around him, their faces grim. His voice was raw, strained, but clear. He drew up a final play, his hand moving decisively across the whiteboard. It was a brilliant play. It was a perfect play. And our point guard missed the shot. The buzzer sounded, a mournful, final cry. We lost. The locker room was a tomb. The silence of defeat is the worst kind of silence. Coach Thorne came in, his face pale. He didn't yell. He didn't throw anything. He just stood in the middle of the room, the weight of the loss pressing down on him. "Hit the showers," he said, his voice hollow. "Bus leaves in 30. He turned and walked into his small, adjoining office, shutting the door behind him. Later, on the long, dark bus ride home, I saw him. He was sitting in the front seat, alone, staring out at the black ribbon of the highway. The rest of the team was asleep or lost in the blue glow of their phones. But he just sat there, a solitary silhouette against the passing lights. He looked broken. The iron facade had crumbled, and in its place was a profound, aching vulnerability. My chance came a few days later. I went to the training room for our session, and he was there, but he wasn't ready for me. He was on the phone, his back to the door. His voice was low and tight with frustration. "No, I don't understand," he was saying. "Just tell me why. Is it Dad? Is he okay?" A long pause. I should have left. I should have backed out of the room and given him his privacy. But I was frozen. "Fine. Don't call me then. I get it." He hung up, the sound of the phone hitting its cradle unnaturally loud in the quiet room. He stood for a long moment, his shoulders slumped, his head bowed. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of pure exhaustion and defeat. He looked smaller. More human. He finally turned and saw me standing in the doorway. A flash of anger crossed his face, quickly replaced by a weary resignation. "Miller. Didn't hear you come in. Sorry, coach. I can come back later. No, he said, shaking his head. No, it's fine. Let's just get this over with. His movements were sluggish, distracted. He wasn't the focused, intense coach I was used to. He was just a man who'd had a bad phone call. A man carrying a heavy weight. The power dynamic, for the first time, felt level. He was the one who was vulnerable. I was the one who was steady. We went through the exercises in a thick, uncomfortable silence. The air was heavy with his unspoken trouble. Finally, as he was wrapping my ankle, I found a sliver of courage. Are you okay, coach? The question hung in the air between us. It was a breach of protocol. A crossing of a line. He stopped what he was doing, his hand still on my ankle. He didn't look at me. He just stared at the floor. I'm fine, Miller, he said, but his voice was rough. That loss, it wasn't your fault, I said, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. It was a good play. The shot just didn't fall. It happens. He was quiet for a long time. I thought I had made a terrible mistake. Then, he let out a long, slow breath. A sigh that seemed to carry weeks of stress with it. Thanks, Miller, he said, his voice barely a whisper. He finally looked up, and his eyes were raw. Grateful. He gave my ankle a final, gentle pat and stood up. You're almost there. A few more days, you'll be ready for light drills. Something had broken between us. The tension, the awkwardness, it had been replaced by a fragile, tentative understanding. I had seen behind the curtain. And he had let me. He had accepted a moment of comfort from me, his player. The ground beneath my feet had shifted, and I had no idea where we would land. The night of the turning point arrived unexpectedly. It was a week later. I had been cleared for light practice, but I was still required to do my rehab exercises. We'd had a late game at home, a solid win this time, but everyone was drained. The gym slowly emptied out, the sounds of bouncing balls and shouting players replaced by the quiet hum of the building settling for the night. I was in the training room, going through my routine alone, when he walked in. I thought he was just grabbing something from the supply closet. But he closed the door behind him, the soft click echoing in the silence. How's the ankle feel? He asked. His voice was different. Softer. Devoid of its usual coaching authority. Good, I said, my heart starting its familiar, frantic rhythm. Almost 100%. He didn't leave. He leaned against the door, his arms crossed, just watching me. The intimacy of the setting, the small, closed-off room, the late hour, the echoing quiet of the empty arena around us, was suffocating. It felt like the world had shrunk to just the two of us. You were quiet tonight, he said. It wasn't an accusation. It was an observation. I shrugged, focusing on stretching my calf. Just focused on the game. No, not on the bench, he clarified, and my blood ran cold. In here. For the past few weeks. You're always quiet, he paused. I never know what you're thinking. I stopped stretching. I looked at him, really looked at him. His face was shadowed in the dim light, his expression unreadable. This was it. This was the moment where the path forked. I could retreat into my shell, give him a non-answer, and we would go back to being coach and player. Or I could take a step into the terrifying unknown. My fear of emotional risk was a physical thing, a hand squeezing my throat. But the longing for connection, for this one man to see me, was stronger. You probably wouldn't want to know, I said, my voice shaking slightly. A slow smile touched his lips, a rare, startling thing. It changed his whole face. Try me. And so, the confession began. Not with a grand declaration of love, but with something smaller, more honest. I told him how I watched him. How I saw the pressure he was under, the weight he carried. I told him that I recognized the solitude in him because I felt it too. I didn't use the word love or crush. I just talked about seeing him. He listened, his gaze never leaving my face. He pushed off from the door and walked slowly towards me, stopping just a few feet away. The space between us vibrated with a fragile, powerful energy. You see a lot, Miller, he said, his voice low and husky. He took another step, closing the distance. He was so close now I could feel the warmth of his body. He lifted a hand, and I flinched, expecting him to clap me on the shoulder in a platonic, coach-like gesture. But he didn't. His hand came up to my face, his fingers gently brushing a stray lock of hair from my forehead. His touch was hesitant, questioning. It lingered for a second too long. My breath hitched. The world stopped spinning. "My name is Marcus," he whispered. And then he leaned in. The kiss was not what I had fantasized about. It wasn't frantic or passionate. It was slow. It was searching. It was a question asked without words. His lips were soft, tentative against mine. It was a kiss that tasted of uncertainty and a deep, unspoken loneliness. I responded with all the hidden longing I had carried for months, my hands coming up to grip his shirt, pulling him closer, anchoring myself to him. It was a breakthrough. A shattering of walls. In the silent, empty heart of the arena, under the dim fluorescent lights of the training room, we were no longer coach and player. We were just two solitary people who had finally, terrifyingly, found each other. When we finally broke apart, we just stood there, foreheads pressed together, breathing each other's air. The silence was no longer heavy or awkward. It was a sanctuary. "We can't, this is," he started, his voice thick with emotion. "I know," I whispered back. I didn't care. For the first time in my life, the risk felt worth it. He drove me back to my dorm. The car ride was a blur of charged silence. He didn't touch me again, but I could feel him beside me, a constant, magnetic pull. When he stopped in front of my building, he turned off the engine. "Liam," he said, using my first name for the first time. The sound of it on his lips was a revelation. I don't know what this is." "Me neither," I admitted. He reached across the console and took my hand. His grip was warm and strong, engulfing mine completely. "Get some sleep." I got out of the car and walked into my dorm in a daze, his touch still tingling on my skin. I didn't sleep. I lay in bed, replaying the kiss, the sound of my name in his mouth, the feel of his hand in mine. A cautious, fragile hope began to bloom in my chest, a feeling so foreign I barely recognized it. For the first time, my solitude didn't feel safe. It felt empty. The morning after was a descent into hell. I woke up to the harsh gray light of dawn, the hope from the night before already curdling into anxiety. It was a dream. It had to be. A man like him, a coach like him, wouldn't risk everything for a quiet, unremarkable player like me. The logic of the daylight was cruel and unforgiving. My anxiety was a physical thing, a knot of writhing snakes in my stomach. I checked my phone. Nothing. No text. No missed call. Just silence. I walked to the gym for morning practice with a sense of impending doom. I saw him across the court, and my heart leaped. But he didn't look at me. He was standing with the assistant coach, his back to me, all business. He blew his whistle, and practice began. He was Coach Thorne again. All of him. The voice was sharp, the criticism was biting, the distance was back, 1,000 miles of it between us. He never made eye contact. When he addressed me, it was as Miller, and his tone was colder than ever before. It was as if last night had never happened. Every drill was a new kind of torture. I felt the eyes of my teammates on me, wondering why the coach was riding me so hard. I fumbled a pass. I missed an easy shot. My body was on the court, but my mind was screaming. He regrets it. It was a mistake. A moment of weakness. He's ashamed of it. He's ashamed of me. The self-recrimination was a vicious cycle. I was stupid to think it could be anything more. I had misread everything. I had pushed him, taken advantage of a moment of vulnerability. The spiral of doubt was dizzying, pulling me under. After practice, he disappeared into his office without a word. The door clicked shut, a sound of absolute finality. I was supposed to have a rehab session with him. I waited outside the training room, my hands clammy, my stomach churning. He never came. The period of silence began. It lasted for 3 days. 3 days of him actively avoiding me. He would have the assistant coach run the drills I was in. He would turn and walk the other way if he saw me in the hallway. The gym, which had been the site of our connection, became a landscape of my humiliation. My solitude, which I had once cherished, returned with a vengeance. But it was different now. It was no longer a peaceful fortress. It was a cold, empty prison cell, its walls papered with the memory of what I had briefly tasted and lost. The silence wasn't just an absence of sound, it was an active, malevolent presence. It was the sound of his rejection. I stopped eating. I barely slept. I walked through my days like a ghost, the world muted and gray. The ache in my chest was a constant, physical pain. I had risked everything, I had opened a door in myself that had been locked for years, and he had slammed it shut in my face. The vulnerability was unbearable. I just wanted to go back to the way things were before, when the wanting was a secret, manageable thing. But there was no going back. On the third night, I hit my breaking point. I skipped dinner and went to the gym. It was late, almost midnight. I just needed to shoot. I needed the familiar rhythm, the mindless repetition, to drown out the noise in my head. The main court was dark, but a single light was on over one of the hoops at the far end. I could hear the steady, rhythmic thump of a basketball. My heart seized. I knew that sound. I walked slowly, silently, along the edge of the court, staying in the shadows. It was him. He was alone, dressed in sweats, methodically shooting free throws. One after another. Swish. 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 His form was perfect, economical, beautiful. But there was a fury in it. He wasn't practicing, he was punishing himself. Exorcising something. I watched him for a long time, my fear at war with my desperation. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to know. I stepped out of the shadows. He didn't seem to notice me at first. I had to clear my throat. Coach. The ball he was about to shoot fell from his hands. It bounced once, twice, and then rolled to a stop at his feet. He froze, his back still to me. His shoulders were tense, rigid. He finally turned around. In the dim light, his face was a landscape of exhaustion and conflict. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. He looked like me. Liam, he said, and the sound of my name was a physical blow. He hadn't meant to say it. I could see it in the way his eyes widened in surprise at his own voice. The return. The first contact after the silence. It wasn't an apology. It was just my name. And it was enough. He walked towards me, closing the space I had been so sure was permanent. He stopped in front of me, his expression torn. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice raw. I panicked. I've been a coward. The confession I had been so desperate to hear. It wasn't about him not wanting me. It was about him being afraid. The relief was so immense it made me dizzy. "I thought you regretted it," I whispered, the words catching in my throat. "I thought it was a mistake." "No," he said, shaking his head vehemently. "God, no. It wasn't a mistake. It was the first real thing that's happened to me in a long time. And it scared the hell out of me." He looked down at his hands, then back at me, his eyes filled with a vulnerability that mirrored my own. "My whole life is this team. This job. I could lose everything." "I know," I said. "But these last 3 days," he continued, his voice dropping lower, "have been worse than any losing season. The silence. I couldn't stand it. Avoiding you, seeing the look on your face, it was killing me." This was the clarifying conversation. The laying bare of fears. He was just as scared as I was. Maybe more. He had more to lose. But he was here. He had come back. "I don't know how we do this, Liam," he said, his voice pleading. "But I don't want to go back to how it was before." "Me neither," I said, and a real, genuine smile broke through the misery of the past few days. He reached out, his hand cupping my jaw, his thumb stroking my cheek. The simple touch was a promise. A recommitment. Can I take you somewhere? Away from here. Away from the gym, the team, all of it." I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. "I have a small house off campus," he said. "Let me make you dinner." It wasn't a key to his apartment. It was something better. It was an invitation into his life. His real life, outside the suffocating confines of the court. It was a symbolic gesture of profound significance. A move from the professional to the personal. A tangible act of commitment. We left the gym together, walking out into the cool night air. The silence between us now was comfortable, filled with a shared understanding. The push and pull was over. The retreat had ended. This felt like a beginning. His house was small, unassuming, on a quiet, tree-lined street miles from the university. Inside, it was neat, sparsely furnished, but it felt like him. There were stacks of books on history and philosophy, a well-worn leather armchair, and photos on the mantelpiece of people I assumed were his family. It was a home. A sanctuary. He moved around the small kitchen with an easy, practiced familiarity. I sat at the small wooden table, just watching him. The tension that always seemed to live in his shoulders was gone. Here, he wasn't Coach Thorne. He was just Marcus. He made a simple pasta dish, and we ate in a comfortable silence, broken by easy questions and answers. I learned about his childhood in a small town, his own college basketball career, the strained relationship with his father that I had overheard on the phone. He learned about my love for books, my quiet family, my dream of being a writer. We were filling in the spaces, sketching the outlines of each other's lives. After dinner, we moved to the living room. He didn't turn on the television. We just sat on the couch, a few inches of space between us, the only light coming from a small lamp in the corner. "I'm still scared," he admitted, looking at me, his eyes dark and serious in the dim light. "Me too," I said. I reached across the space between us and took his hand. But not as scared as I was of being alone anymore. He squeezed my hand, a silent affirmation. He leaned in and kissed me again. This time, there was no hesitation. It was slow, and deep, and sure. It was a kiss that spoke of relief, of acceptance, of a future. I stayed the night. We slept in the same bed, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like an intruder in someone else's space. I felt like I belonged. There was no anxiety, no fear of the morning. I fell asleep curled against his back, his steady breathing a lullaby, feeling safer than I had ever felt in my life. The next morning, I woke to the smell of coffee. I opened my eyes and saw him standing by the window, a mug in his hand, looking out at the morning. He was wearing a simple t-shirt and sweatpants, his hair messy from sleep. He turned and saw me awake, and a slow, genuine smile spread across his face. The same smile I had seen once before, the one that changed everything. "Morning," he said, his voice soft. This was the new beginning. This was the domestic intimacy I never knew I craved. Making coffee together. Sharing the quiet of a Sunday morning. The absence of anxiety was the most profound gift. There was no recoil, no retreat. Just this. Just us. I got out of bed and walked over to him. He handed me a mug of coffee, our fingers brushing. The touch was simple, easy, and it sent a pleasant warmth through me, not the frantic, panicked heat of before. We stood there by the window for a long time, sipping our coffee, watching the world wake up. I thought about my old life, the fortress of solitude I had built around myself. It had kept me safe, but it had also kept me from living. Marcus Thorne had been a disruption, a storm that crashed against my walls. He was the plot twist I never saw coming. He had forced me into a state of vulnerability I had spent my entire life avoiding. And in doing so, he had saved me. He hadn't just breached my fortress, he had shown me that I didn't need it. The connection I had found with him was stronger than any wall I could ever build. Looking at him now, the formidable coach replaced by this quiet, gentleman, I realized that the court was no longer the only place the noise in my head went quiet. He was. His presence was a new kind of silence. A peaceful, hopeful silence, big enough for two. I had come to the team looking for a controlled solitude, and instead, I had found a shared one. I had found him. And for the first time, I felt truly, completely, at home.